The wind blew hard that evening, sweeping dust and tumbleweed across the dirt road that led through the small settlement of Ashwood Valley. The air carried the scent of dry grass, wood smoke, and the faint sound of a church bell in the distance. It was the kind of place where life moved slow, where men rose before dawn to mend fences and women carried water from the well, their aprons dusted with flour and worry. Yet that evening something hung heavier than usual in the air, a quiet sadness that seemed to follow the small figure walking along the edge of town. She couldn't have been more than 12, her thin arms clutching a worn blanket close to her chest. The hem of her faded dress dragged in the dirt, torn from the miles she'd walked. Her shoes were gone long before sundown, lost somewhere on the trail that stretched behind her like a story too painful to tell. The girl's face was pale, but her eyes held something fierce, something far too old for her years. The villagers watched her as she passed, whispering behind curtains and leaning against porch rails. They didn't ask where she came from. Out here everyone had secrets, and questions had a way of digging up ghosts better left buried. Still, one thing was clear even to the most hardened ranch hand. The child carried more than exhaustion in her small frame. Beneath the blanket pressed against her body, there was a fragile life growing, one she was too young to understand, yet already sworn to protect. The sun was sinking low, bleeding orange light across the open fields. She kept walking until her legs trembled beneath her. The last sound she heard before her knees gave way was the distant neigh of a horse and the creak of saddle leather. Then everything blurred, sky, dust, and the ache in her chest, as she fell into the dirt beside the fence line. When she opened her eyes again, the light was softer. The smell of smoke and coffee drifted nearby. A campfire flickered a few paces away, and beside it sat a man, a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy, whose weathered face looked carved by years of sun and silence. His hat shaded his eyes, but the light caught the rough kindness in them. He didn't speak right away, only watched her as if weighing whether she was real or just another ghost of the plains. "You fell by my fence," he finally said, his voice low and steady. "Ain't much of a welcome, I suppose." The girl tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her side. He reached out a hand, stopping short before touching her. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe here. Safe." The word felt strange on her tongue, almost foreign. She wanted to believe him, but safety was something she hadn't known for a long time. Not since the night she'd run. Not since the world had turned against her in one cruel twist of fate. The cowboy poured a bit of water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She drank slowly, eyes never leaving his face. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. The truth was tangled in pain she wasn't ready to share. "Lila," she whispered finally, though whether it was her real name or one borrowed from memory, even she couldn't say. "Well, Lila," he said, leaning back on his boots. "You're lucky I was riding that stretch tonight. Folks don't take kindly to strangers around here." He glanced toward the horizon where the last light faded. The land stretched wide and lonely, marked by rolling hills and barbed wire. It was a hard country, one that didn't forgive easily. He'd learned that lesson himself long ago. The girl's stomach growled softly, breaking the silence. He passed her a piece of bread and a bit of jerky, rough but warm from the fire. She ate like someone who hadn't had a full meal in days. He didn't press her for answers, but his mind turned over questions all the same. What kind of life would send a child alone onto the open prairie? And what was she running from? Later, when she'd eaten and drifted half into sleep, he caught sight of the small bump beneath her blanket. His chest tightened. He looked away quickly, guilt and disbelief mixing inside him. Out here, he'd seen hardship in every shape. Orphans, widows, drifters, but never something like this. A child herself, carrying another. The fire crackled softly, throwing shadows across his weathered face. He thought of the past he tried to bury, the mistakes, the silence, the long nights spent trying to make peace with things that couldn't be undone. Maybe, in some strange way, this broken child had wandered into his path for a reason. Still, he knew enough about the world to understand that fate didn't hand out mercy for free. By morning, Lila was awake before him. She sat near the dying fire, staring at the ashes as if they might whisper what to do next. When the cowboy stirred, she looked up, startled. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "I can keep walking." He stood, brushing dust from his coat. "And walk where? You'd never make it past the river before nightfall. Besides, there's a storm coming." He nodded toward the dark line forming on the horizon. "Best ride it out here." She lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the edge of her blanket. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind had shifted, cooler now, carrying the faint rumble of thunder from miles away. It was a sound both comforting and foreboding, as if nature itself was warning them that the peace between them was only temporary. As the day wore on, he fixed her a place to rest inside the small barn near his cabin. The horses shifted uneasily, sensing her presence, but soon quieted as she moved among them, gentle and cautious. It surprised him how calm they grew around her. There was something in her stillness, something that seemed to reach even the wildest hearts. By dusk, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then in heavy sheets. He stood at the doorway watching the storm roll over the plains. Behind him, Lila sat near the hearth, her eyes distant. She seemed so small against the glow of the fire, yet there was an unspoken strength in her silence. It stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years, a sense of duty, maybe even hope. He poured 2 mugs of coffee, though she only held hers for warmth. "You can stay till the storm clears," he said. "After that?" "We'll see," she nodded but didn't look up. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke next. "He said he'd come for me," she murmured. But he never did. The cowboy froze, the mug halfway to his lips. The fire popped, casting a brief flare of light across her face. Her eyes shimmered with a pain far too deep for her age. He set the mug down slowly, unsure what to say. Whoever he was, the wound ran deep enough to shape the rest of her life. Outside, thunder rolled closer. Inside, the silence grew thick between them. That night, as the storm raged, the cowboy lay awake listening to the wind beat against the walls. The girl slept fitfully, her breathing uneven. He turned the memory of her words over and over in his mind, wondering what kind of man would abandon a child like that, and what she might be hiding still. When morning came, the rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet earth. The sun broke weakly through the clouds, spilling light across the land. He stepped outside, boots sinking into the mud, and looked toward the trail she'd come from. There were no footprints left, only a washed-out path and an uneasy feeling that trouble wasn't far behind. Inside, Lila stirred, unaware that in the days to come, her past would find her again, and the quiet rancher who'd taken her in would be forced to choose between the life he'd built and the life he could save. The wind shifted once more, carrying with it the faint echo of distant hooves. The cowboy lifted his head, listening. Whatever was coming, it wasn't the kind of company a man could turn away from, and as the first rider appeared on the horizon, cloaked in dust and silence, both their lives were about to change forever. The morning stretched quiet after the storm, the kind of quiet that made a man listen twice just to be sure the world was still there. The land steamed under the newborn sun, and puddles gleamed in the ruts of the wagon road that wound through the valley. The cowboy stood near the fence line, one hand resting on the post as he watched that lone rider grow clearer in the distance. Whoever it was, they were coming fast. He turned back toward the barn where Lila sat by the open door, her small frame wrapped in a wool blanket. Her eyes followed him, curious but cautious. She'd been like that since the night he found her, watchful, like a creature always ready to run. "You best stay inside," he said, voice even. "Someone's coming up the trail." She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the blanket. "Is it him?" she asked softly, and though she didn't say who, he understood. The question hung between them, heavy with things unspoken. "Don't know yet," he replied. "But whoever it is, I'll handle it." He moved to his horse, saddled quick, and waited near the gate. The rider drew closer until he could make out the shape. A man, tall and lean, coat flapping behind him, hat pulled low against the light. When he finally reined in the horse, he tipped the brim of his hat and nodded. "Mornin'," the cowboy said, eyes narrowed slightly. "Mornin'," the stranger returned, his voice rough from travel. "Name's Whitlock. Sheriff out of Cedar Ridge. Got word a young girl might have passed through this way. You seen anyone?" The cowboy's jaw tightened. "Plenty of travelers pass through. Hard country out here. Can't say I've seen anyone that fits whatever you're looking for." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, eyes sharp. He wasn't a man easily fooled. "She's just a child," he said. "Ran off from a ranch north of here. Folks worried sick." Something in his tone sounded rehearsed. The cowboy didn't trust it. A child running off don't usually stir up a sheriff unless there's more to the story. Whitlock shifted in the saddle. "You could say that. Her folks claim she's got herself mixed up in something she don't understand. They just want her home." The cowboy met his gaze evenly. "Home ain't always where someone wants to go." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind lifted between them, carrying the faint sound of the barn door creaking. The sheriff's eyes flicked toward it, then back to the cowboy. "You run a quiet place here," Whitlock said finally. "Mind if I look around?" The cowboy gave a slow shake of his head. "I mind." Something in his calm tone made the sheriff hesitate. After a pause, Whitlock nodded once, pulling the reins. "If she comes through, you send word to Cedar Ridge. Folks there'll be mighty grateful." "I'll keep that in mind," the cowboy said. The sheriff turned his horse and rode off, the sound of hooves fading down the muddy trail. When he was gone, the cowboy exhaled slow, his shoulders easing just slightly. Then he turned toward the barn. Lila stood just inside the shadows, pale and silent. She'd heard everything. "You lied," she said softly. "I kept you safe," he corrected. "There's a difference." Her eyes filled with something between gratitude and fear. "They'll come back," she whispered. "They always do." He didn't answer right away. "Then we'll be ready," he said at last, though even he wasn't sure what that meant. That afternoon, the sky cleared enough for him to tend to the horses and check the fences. Lila stayed close to the cabin, sweeping the porch and helping where she could. There was a quiet strength in her, something that came not from comfort, but from surviving too much too soon. When he came back from the pasture, she was kneeling near the chicken coop, feeding the hens with a handful of cracked corn. The sight struck him. This small girl finding peace in something so simple. "You work like someone who's done it before," he said, leaning on the fence. "My mama kept chickens," she murmured. "Back before," she trailed off, eyes distant. He waited, but she didn't go on. Whatever came before was locked away behind that silence she wore like armor. As dusk settled, he cooked beans over the fire, and they ate without much talk. The sound of the wind against the cabin walls was the only company. When the last light faded, Lila spoke again. "The man who came, he wasn't here to help me," she said quietly. "He works for them." "Them?" he asked, setting down his cup. "The people I lived with. The ones who said they'd take care of me after my mama passed." Her voice trembled just slightly. "They weren't kind. When things got bad, I ran. That's when I met someone who said he'd help me. But he left before the snow came." Her words painted a picture too painful to finish. The cowboy didn't push her. He only nodded and stirred the fire. "Sometimes folks do cruel things," he said. "But sometimes running's the only way to find something better." She looked at him then, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You think there's something better out there?" He thought of the life he'd led. The long roads, the lonely camps, the mistakes that still haunted him. "I think there can be," he said. "If a person don't give up looking." The next morning brought no sign of riders, but the unease lingered. The cowboy saddled his horse and told her to stay near the cabin. He needed to ride into town for supplies and to listen for talk. Ashwood Valley was small, a cluster of wooden buildings framed by endless land. When he rode in, a few townsfolk nodded but kept their distance. He tied up his horse outside the general store and stepped inside. The storekeeper, a gray-bearded man named Harlan, glanced up from the counter. "Mornin', Luke," he greeted. The cowboy gave a brief nod. "Mornin'." "Heard any talk from Cedar Ridge?" Harlan scratched his chin. "Sheriff Whitlock rode through here yesterday. Said he's looking for a runaway young girl. Folks say she's in trouble of some kind. Can't tell what kind, though." Luke felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "Trouble how?" Harlan shrugged. "Didn't say. Only that her folks were rich ranchers from up north. Sounded like they got influence." He lowered his voice. "You asking for any particular reason?" "Just curious," Luke said evenly, though his tone carried more truth than he wanted. When he rode back, the wind had picked up again, bringing a sharp edge of cold. He found Lila sitting on the porch steps, waiting. The moment she saw his face, she knew. "They're looking for me," she said. "They are," he replied. "But I don't reckon I'll hand you over." Her eyes widened. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "And sometimes that's all a man needs." For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the prairie wind whistle through the grass. Then she said softly, "They'll come at night. They always do." That evening he checked his rifle and lantern, setting them by the door. The sky had turned dark fast, stars buried behind thick clouds. The land around the ranch was too still, too quiet. Inside, Lila dozed near the fire, but her sleep was restless. Every creak of the wood made her stir. Luke sat in the chair by the window, watching the horizon. Somewhere out there, he felt it. The shift in the wind, the sound of movement too steady to be the weather. A shadow crossed the ridge, faint but sure. Then another. He stood slow and careful and moved to the doorway. Out in the distance, shapes moved against the moonlight. 3, maybe 4 riders. They kept low, their torches dimmed. His hand went to the rifle, but he didn't fire. Not yet. Whoever they were, they weren't there to talk. Behind him, Lila's voice broke the silence. "They found me." Her tone wasn't fear this time. It was something colder. Acceptance. Luke turned to her. "Then they'll have to go through me first." Outside, the riders drew closer, their horses cutting through the wet ground. The night grew thick with tension. He could feel it, the moment before everything changed. The wind rattled the windows. The fire hissed low, and somewhere in the darkness, a voice called out, a man's voice, deep and familiar, carrying across the open land. "Send her out, cowboy. Ain't no reason for blood tonight." Luke stepped to the porch, rifle in hand, eyes hard as stone. The torchlight flickered across his face, casting long shadows behind him. Inside, Lila stood frozen by the doorway, her small hands clutching the blanket tight. The sound of the horses' snorts and the men's low murmurs filled the air. He called back, voice calm but firm. "You'll get her over my dead body." The night fell silent again, save for the restless wind. Then the click of a rifle echoed from the ridge, and in that single heartbeat of stillness before the first shot rang out, both of them understood. The past had found them, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night split open with the crack of a rifle, the sound echoing through the valley like thunder trapped between the hills. Luke ducked low by the porch post, the shot splintering wood just inches from where he'd been standing. His horse neighed in fear from the corral, kicking against the fence. Inside, Lila dropped to her knees, her heart pounding hard enough to feel it in her throat. "Stay down," Luke hissed, cocking the rifle and peering into the dark. The torchlight flickered out on the ridge, swallowed by the black sky. The riders had gone silent, waiting for him to move first. He knew that trick well. Men like that didn't rush. They were patient, and patience in the wrong hands could be deadly. He crouched near the steps, thinking, whoever those men were, they'd planned this. He could tell by the way they moved, by the stillness between their sounds. One thing was sure, they weren't lawmen. Lawmen didn't come after a scared child in the middle of the night. Luke. Lila's voice trembled behind him. "They won't stop." "I know," he said quietly. "But neither will I." The next shot came quick, tearing through the window glass. The lamp inside shattered, sending sparks across the floorboards. Lila scrambled backward as the small flame caught one of the blankets. Luke rushed in, snatching it and stomping out the fire before it spread. The air filled with the sharp smell of smoke and gunpowder. "Out the back," he said. "Now." She hesitated only long enough to grab the small satchel by the door. Together they slipped through the rear exit, moving low through the tall grass behind the barn. The storm from the night before had left the ground wet and soft, their boots sinking deep as they ran. Behind them, the riders' torches flared again, orange light cutting through the dark like angry eyes. They reached the tree line just as another shot cracked the night. Bark exploded near Luke's shoulder, showering them both in splinters. He pulled Lila behind a fallen log, breathing hard. "You keep your head down and don't move till I say," he whispered. "But do it." She nodded, clutching the satchel tight as he crawled to the edge of the clearing. From there he could see the cabin, the flames licking faintly through the broken window. The men were spreading out, 3 of them just like he'd guessed. One stayed near the horses while the other 2 circled wide. They weren't shooting now. They were searching. Luke raised his rifle, steadying his breath. He didn't want bloodshed, but if they meant to take her, there wasn't another choice. The first man stepped into range, torchlight brushing his face, a scar along his jaw, eyes cold and practiced. Luke fired once. The man dropped, torch falling from his hand. The other 2 spun toward the sound, shouting. Luke ducked behind the log, pulling Lila closer. "Run," he whispered. "Head for the creek. Stay in the water as long as you can. It'll hide your tracks. What about you?" "I'll be right behind." She hesitated, eyes wide with fear and trust tangled together. Then she turned and ran, disappearing into the dark. Luke waited until he couldn't hear her steps anymore, then slid farther into the trees. The riders were closing in, voices sharp. He could make out bits of their talk. "She's worth too much to lose," one said. "The boss'll skin us if we go back empty." "Then find her," another snapped. "I'll deal with the cowboy." Luke felt his grip tighten on the rifle. Worth too much to lose. The words stuck in his head like thorns. Whatever they wanted from her, it wasn't mercy. He waited until one of them passed close, then moved silent as a shadow. He struck with the butt of the rifle, catching the man off guard. They struggled in the mud, the man cursing as they rolled through the wet grass. Luke's strength came from years of hard ranch work, and within seconds the man stilled, knocked out cold. He left him there and slipped toward the sound of the creek. The air grew cooler, filled with the rush of water and the hum of crickets. Then he saw her, a small figure crouched by the stream, shivering. "Lila," he whispered. She looked up, relief washing over her face. "I thought you weren't coming. I said I would." He helped her across the water, both of them soaked to the knees. On the far side, the land rose into a slope covered in pines. From there, he could see faint lights flickering where the cabin had been. It was gone now, swallowed by smoke. For a while, neither spoke. They just kept walking, guided by moonlight and instinct. Finally, Lila said quietly, "Those men work for them. The ranchers I told you about." Luke nodded, still scanning the dark ahead. "What do they want with you?" Her answer came slow, heavy. "I don't think it's me they want. It's what they did. If I tell anyone, they lose everything." That made sense of the sheriff's strange visit, the moneyed urgency behind the search. She wasn't just a runaway. They were trying to erase her. By dawn, they reached an old line cabin up in the hills. It was barely standing, but it offered shelter and distance from the valley. Luke got a fire going while Lila wrapped herself in a blanket. She hadn't eaten since the day before, but sleep pulled at her harder than hunger. When she finally drifted off, Luke sat by the fire, staring at the flames. His thoughts churned. There were too many questions: who those men really were, what they'd done to the girl, and how deep the lies ran in Cedar Ridge. One thing was clear: he couldn't go back now. Later that morning, he saddled up and rode into town alone, leaving Lila hidden with enough food to last the day. Ashwood Valley was already stirring when he arrived. A group of men stood outside the saloon talking low. When he passed, they went quiet. Rumors traveled faster than dust in small towns, and he could feel eyes following him all the way to the general store. Inside, Harlan looked up, his face tight. "Heard there was trouble out by your place last night," he said. "Fire seen from town." Luke didn't answer right away. "Any word from Cedar Ridge?" Harlan's brow furrowed. "Sheriff came through again early this morning. Said the girl's dangerous. Claims she's been lying. Said she stole from her guardians and ran off." Luke's jaw clenched. "You believe that?" Harlan sighed. "I don't know what to believe, Luke, but you be careful. Men like those ranchers don't come asking for favors. They buy them." When Luke stepped back into the sunlight, he saw a familiar figure down the street. Sheriff Whitlock, standing by his horse talking to two strangers. Both wore dusters, guns at their sides. One of them was the scarred man from the night before. Luke turned quick and slipped into the alley. He had to move fast. Whatever story Whitlock was selling, it was spreading. He made it back to the line cabin by dusk. Lila was sitting by the fire, eyes wide when she saw his face. "You shouldn't have gone," she said. "I had to know how far this goes," he replied. "And now I do." She waited, clutching the blanket tight. "They've got the sheriff," he said. "And half the town ready to believe their lies. They're saying you stole from them." She shook her head fiercely. "I didn't take anything. I only took a chance to live." "I know," he said gently. "But they don't care about truth. They care about control." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the first stars began to show, faint against the fading sky. After a long silence, Lila asked, "What will we do now?" He didn't answer right away. The truth was, he didn't know. The right thing and the safe thing weren't the same anymore. Finally, he said, "There's a woman in Silver Bluff, Martha Crow. Used to run a mission for orphans and settlers' kids. If anyone can help you, it's her. But it's 2 days' ride through rough country. Then we should go," she said quickly. "We will," he promised. At first light. That night, Luke didn't sleep. He sat by the window with the rifle across his knees, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the walls. Every sound made his pulse quicken: the snap of a branch, the hoot of an owl, the whisper of leaves. Somewhere out in the darkness, men were still looking for her. And as much as he'd like to believe they could outrun what was coming, he knew better. The plains had long memories, and secrets buried under money and fear always found their way back to the surface. Just before dawn, a soft sound reached his ears, the faint crunch of a boot on gravel. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing. Outside, a figure moved through the fog, stepping closer to the cabin. It wasn't one of the riders this time. It was a woman. Her coat was soaked with dew, her hat pulled low. She raised a hand as she came closer. "Don't shoot," she called softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." Luke didn't lower the rifle. "Then why are you here?" The woman stopped a few yards away, her face still hidden by shadow. "Because," she said, her voice trembling just enough to be real. "I know what they did to that girl, and if you don't move fast, they'll do worse to you." The fire behind him flickered, throwing light across her face at last. And what he saw there made the ground shift beneath him. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone he thought long gone, someone who knew both his past and the truth Lila was running from. And in that instant, he realized the fight ahead was far bigger than one runaway child. It was about the kind of justice no court would ever hand out. Luke's hands tightened around the rifle as he studied the woman. Her coat was wet from the morning dew, her boots muddied from travel. He recognized her immediately, though years had softened the edges of her face. She was someone from the past, a ghost he hadn't thought to see again, someone who carried knowledge, secrets, and danger all in one breath. "I thought you were gone," he said slowly, keeping his voice low. "I hoped I was," she replied. Her eyes darted to the tree line, to the creek, to where Lila still slept near the fire. "But you know the plains, they don't forgive the quiet." "And neither do some people," Luke's mind raced. He didn't lower the rifle, not fully. "Not yet." "Then tell me why you're here. And don't lie." Her gaze met his, unwavering. "Because that girl, the one hiding in your cabin, is in more danger than you know. The people looking for her, they're tied to everything you've been trying to forget." He froze. The words cut sharper than any bullet. The past was supposed to stay buried. The mistakes, the debts, the people he couldn't save, they weren't meant to reach this girl. But somehow they had. Somehow everything he'd tried to outrun had caught up to him. "You're saying it's bigger than just her?" he asked, voice taut. "Yes," she said, her tone steady but urgent. "Much bigger. And if you stay here, you'll both be trapped. They're coming tonight, and they won't stop for anything." Luke's eyes went to the ridge, to the dark hills beyond the line of trees. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and metallic. Something in him shifted. The quiet patience of the plains, the long hours of survival, the instinct to fight for what mattered. All of it surged at once. "Then we move," he said. "But we need a plan," she nodded. "I know a place," she whispered. "Old cabins abandoned, not far, hidden, but it's dangerous. You'll need to trust me completely." Luke studied her carefully, weighing the risk. He didn't have much choice. Staying meant waiting for the riders to come. Waiting for the conflict to reach them at the worst possible moment. Moving meant stepping into unknown danger, but it might be the only way to give Lila a chance. "All right," he said finally. "Tell me the way." The woman gestured, speaking in quiet, precise directions. The route wound through dense forest, over steep ridges, and along creek beds that could hide a small party from the eyes of men who were searching for blood. Luke memorized each turn, each subtle mark in the landscape. They didn't speak more than necessary. Words were dangerous. Sound was dangerous. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves could betray them. By mid-afternoon, the three of them, Luke, Lila, and the woman, moved cautiously through the underbrush. Lila's small frame stayed close to Luke's side, the satchel clutched to her chest. Her trust in him was fragile but unwavering. She didn't speak much. The fear in her eyes was tempered by a small, quiet determination. She had survived so far, and every step forward was a choice to survive again. The woman glanced back often, scanning the tree line. "They're tracking," she said softly. "Riders, not many but skilled. They'll find signs if we're careless." Luke nodded. "We've dealt with worse." "Maybe," she said, a shadow crossing her face. "But not with what they have, not with what they're willing to do." The sun began to sink as they reached the first ridge. Luke climbed carefully, each step calculated to avoid loose stones. Below them lay a hollow, thick with old trees and fog curling along the creek. It would hide them for the night, at least until the riders figured out their trail. They settled in the hollow just as the sky deepened into twilight. The woman began to gather dead branches for a small fire. Luke frowned. No fire. "They'll see it," she shook her head. "Small flame, hidden under branches. Smoke low. We need light to keep her calm." Lila huddled against Luke's chest, watching the flicker of flames through half-closed eyes. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The tension in the air had grown like a living thing, crawling along her skin, whispering that danger was close. Night fell fully, and the first sounds came, the faint rattle of hooves in the distance, low and careful. Luke moved to a higher vantage, rifle ready. Shadows shifted in the fog, figures moving just out of sight. The riders weren't chasing recklessly. They were tracking, patient, methodical, each step calculated to find their prey. "They know we're here," the woman whispered. "I know," Luke said. He didn't lower the rifle. His heartbeat was steady, but every nerve was alive, scanning the forest for movement, sound, anything that might betray their position. Hours passed in tense silence. The hooves came closer, then faded. They held their breath, waited, and then the sound returned, this time from a different direction. Luke's mind raced. If they split, they could be trying to flank. "We need to move," he said quietly. "Now," Lila stirred, looking up at him. "Where?" "Further north," he said. "Through the ridge. There's an old mine entrance, hidden. Might give us a chance to disappear until morning." The journey through the forest was treacherous. Branches clawed at their clothes, loose stones threatened to roll beneath their boots, and every sound made Lila freeze. Luke kept one hand on her shoulder, guiding her, keeping her close, while the woman led the way with knowledge that came from years of hiding herself. They reached the mine, just as the first pale light of moon filtered through the trees. The entrance was dark and wide enough to swallow them completely. Luke held the rifle forward while the woman lit a small lantern, careful to shield it. Inside, the air was damp and cold, smelling of earth and rust. They pressed deeper into the mine, moving slowly, carefully. Every echo of their boots against the stone floor made Luke's pulse quicken. Somewhere outside, hooves struck the earth in a rhythm that reminded him of a drum of war. "Keep quiet," he whispered. Lila nodded, her small hand in his. Her trust in him was now complete, a bond forged by danger and shared fear. The woman moved ahead, showing them where small alcoves in the mine could hide them, spaces just wide enough to make shadows seem solid and false. They settled into one of the recesses, the lantern dimmed to a glow. Luke scanned the dark, the tension coiling in his shoulders. The night stretched on, each moment filled with anticipation. Every sound from outside, the crack of a branch, a shout muffled by distance, the low murmur of men searching, made him tighten his grip on the rifle. "They're coming," the woman said softly. "They won't give up." "They never do." Luke's jaw clenched. He thought of the cabin, the fire, the broken windows. He thought of the riders chasing them across the valley. And he thought of Lila, fragile yet determined, depending on him in ways no one ever should. Hours passed. Their hiding spot was secure for the moment, but the forest outside stirred with intent. Shadows shifted across the mine entrance as figures approached, moving quietly but with purpose. The sense of impending confrontation wrapped around them like a living thing. Lila whispered, barely audible. "Will they take me?" Luke's eyes never left the darkness. "Not if I can help it," he said. But the words felt thin. He knew the odds, the skill of the men pursuing them, the reach of the forces aligned against them. He couldn't promise her safety, only that he would fight with everything he had. The woman placed a hand on his arm. "They know where you are. Soon it won't matter how hidden you are. You have to be ready." Luke's gaze hardened. He looked at Lila, then the woman, then back at the mine's mouth where shadows were gathering like smoke. The tension built to a point where even breathing felt loud, then faint at first. A voice called from the ridge outside. "Lila, come out! You don't want trouble, just come with us." The first rays of moonlight caught the glint of rifles. The men had spread, encircling the mine's entrance. The forest was silent, but for the soft crunch of boots and the distant whisper of leaves. Luke's hands tightened on the rifle. Lila pressed herself against him. The woman crouched beside him, her face pale but resolute. "Stay low," he said. "And whatever happens, don't move until I tell you." The men's voices grew louder, threatening now, patient yet cruel. The first shot had not yet been fired, but the air itself seemed ready to ignite. Luke felt the tension coil in his chest, every instinct screaming that the moment of confrontation had arrived. Outside, the shadows waited. Inside, the three of them prepared, hearts pounding in sync with the rhythm of the darkened forest. And as the first torchlight flickered against the mine entrance, Luke knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The night was poised on the edge of violence, and the choices made in the next heartbeat would shape everything that followed. The waiting ended here. The storm was coming. The shadows waited outside the mine like predators, but inside, Luke's focus sharpened. Lila pressed against his side, small and trembling, while the woman crouched beside him, tense but steady. The first torchlight crept across the entrance, casting long, wavering shapes that danced on the walls. Luke's heart pounded in rhythm with the horse's hooves he could barely hear beyond the trees. He knew that once they moved, there'd be no turning back. A man stepped forward, voice loud and sharp. "Lila, come on out! Don't make this worse than it has to be." Luke didn't answer. He tightened his grip on the rifle, scanning for openings, for advantage, for anything he could use. The men outside moved in cautious arcs, careful not to expose themselves, but Luke knew that would only last so long. Their patience was a weapon, but his experience on the plains had taught him that every predator had a weakness. "Wait," the woman whispered. "Let them come closer." Luke nodded, trusting her instincts even though tension gripped his chest like iron. They could hear muffled commands outside, low, precise, confident. These weren't simple riders sent to scare. These men were skilled, trained, and ruthless. Their quarry was someone else's child, but in their minds, the hunt was personal. When the first man leaned too close to the entrance, Luke fired a single shot. It rang out sharp and decisive, throwing the figure to the ground. The other men froze, shouts breaking into panicked commands. Luke moved quickly, using the darkness, the shadows, and the alcoves in the mine to his advantage. He wasn't reckless. Every move was deliberate, calculated, aiming to protect Lila above all else. From the back of the mine, the woman handed him another lantern. "We need light to see them, but not enough to give ourselves away," she said. Luke nodded, adjusting the flame. It threw long shadows across the stone walls, giving them cover while illuminating enough to keep track of the approaching danger. The men regrouped outside, but Luke could see their hesitation. Fear had started to creep in. They hadn't expected resistance this smart, this precise, and for the first time the hunters weren't fully in control. "Lila," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Listen to me. I'm going to get us out of this, but you have to stay quiet and follow every instruction. Understand?" She nodded, gripping the blanket around her like armor. Her trust in him had hardened into resolve. She wasn't just a frightened girl anymore. She was someone surviving in a world that had offered little mercy. The fight outside escalated. Shots rang out from beyond the mine's mouth, but the echoes made it hard to locate each attacker. Luke picked his moments carefully, aiming only when necessary. The woman flanked from the shadows, taking advantage of small passages in the rock to strike without being seen. Their cooperation was seamless, silent but effective, born from instinct and necessity. As the first few men were driven back, a tense calm settled for a moment. The air smelled of smoke, damp earth, and adrenaline. Luke exhaled, though he didn't relax. He knew the battle wasn't over, not until they were far from this place. "Can we move?" he whispered. The woman nodded. "There's a hidden exit farther back. If we're careful, we can slip out and follow the creek. It'll lead us toward safe ground." Luke helped Lila to her feet, keeping her close. Their movements were deliberate, silent, shadows against shadows. When they reached the hidden passage, he peeked back at the mine entrance. The men outside were regrouping, frustrated and angry, but slowed. Their confidence had faltered, and that gave them the edge. The creek route was treacherous, steep banks, hidden roots, and slippery stones, but it offered the cover they needed. Lila stumbled once and Luke caught her, whispering encouragement. Every step was tense, but the fear began to shift toward hope. As they followed the winding creek, the woman spoke quietly. "You've kept her alive so far. That's no small thing, Luke, but the real fight isn't over yet. They'll come after her again if she's exposed. You need to make sure she's somewhere they can't reach." Luke listened, weighing her words. He knew she was right. But for the first time in months, he could see a path forward, an actual chance to protect her. By the next morning, the forest thinned, and they reached the edge of the hills overlooking Silver Bluff. It was a small settlement, quiet but sturdy, with homes and buildings clustered along a dusty main road. Luke had never thought he'd feel relief seeing human habitation, but the sight of a place that might offer refuge filled him with cautious optimism. The woman led them to a small mission run by Martha Crow, a sturdy woman with sharp eyes and a gentle heart. She welcomed Lila without questions, seeing the fear and fragility in the girl immediately. Luke stayed just long enough to make arrangements and share what he knew of the threat, then promised to ride back to the hills to keep watch. Lila clung to him, quiet tears running down her cheeks. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered. "You won't be," he said firmly. "I'll make sure of that." Martha Crow took Lila inside, giving her food and a place to rest. Luke stayed outside, watching the hills and ridges, eyes scanning for any sign of riders. But the immediate threat had receded. For now, at least, they were safe. Days passed. Lila grew stronger, regaining a small measure of normalcy in her routines. She helped around the mission, learning chores, carrying water, and tending small gardens. Luke visited regularly, bringing news from the valley and ensuring that anyone who might follow them would find only empty trails. Over time, trust built into something more tangible. Lila began to speak of her past, though carefully, revealing the truth about those who had abandoned her and the harshness she'd endured. She spoke not of vengeance but of survival, of wanting a life where fear didn't rule every moment. Luke listened, offering guidance without judgment. The woman who had helped them remained nearby, though her identity and motives were revealed slowly. She had been tied to the same forces hunting Lila but had broken away, seeking redemption. Her knowledge had been invaluable, and her presence a constant reminder that sometimes the people who know the worst of the world can also be the ones who guide you through it. Eventually, Luke returned to the valley to face the remnants of the threat. The ranchers had not given up entirely, but without the element of surprise, their efforts faltered. Townsfolk who had once been silent began to speak in favor of protecting the girl. The fear that had kept the community passive began to crumble, and Luke used every connection, every piece of influence, to ensure that Lila's safety could be sustained. The most dangerous men were eventually brought to account, not through law alone, but through exposure, through the quiet influence of people who had seen the truth. Luke watched as they were forced to answer for their actions, though the scars of their cruelty remained etched in memory. In the quiet evenings, after the threats had receded and the valley had settled into a fragile peace, Luke found himself sitting with Lila by the fire. She had grown stronger, more confident, but there was still a shadow in her eyes, a shadow shaped by what she had survived. "You're safe now," he told her. "No one can take you like that again." She looked up at him, trust shining through the cautiousness. "Will you stay?" Luke smiled softly. "For as long as you need me." The woman who had guided them watched from the edge of the firelight. "Sometimes," she said, "survival isn't just about escaping danger. It's about finding the people who will stand with you when it comes. You've both done that now." Lila leaned against Luke's side, a quiet sigh of relief escaping her. The land around them was calm, the valley stretching wide and open under the first stars of night. For the first time, she could imagine a future not defined by fear, not dictated by others' cruelty. Luke looked out at the horizon, the wind carrying the faint smell of sage and damp earth. The plains were still wild, still unforgiving, but for the first time in a long time, they belonged to him in a way that meant protection, care, and choice. Martha Crow's mission had become a new home for Lila, a place where she could grow without the shadow of danger constantly looming. Luke remained in the valley, watching, protecting, but also giving her space to flourish. The lessons of survival, trust, and resilience lingered for both of them. Lila had learned courage beyond her years. Luke had rediscovered purpose in guarding a life that mattered. The land itself seemed to breathe easier, as if recognizing that a balance had been restored, though the scars of the past would always remain, etched like the long lines of the hills themselves. The night settled over Ashwood Valley, quiet and still. Stars sparkled above, and for the first time in a long time, Luke allowed himself to hope. Hope that the past could stay behind them, that Lila could have the life she deserved, and that even in the harshest places people could find strength, protection, and a measure of peace. As they sat together by the fire, the wind rustling the tall grass beyond the cabin, Luke thought about the long road that had brought them here. Every choice, every danger faced, every silent moment of trust and fear had led to this. A fragile, yet unbreakable bond, a chance at safety, and the quiet promise that they would face the future together. The story of survival, courage, and resilience ended not in victory alone, but in the quiet understanding that life could be rebuilt, even in the most unforgiving corners of the world. And in that understanding, Lila and Luke found the beginnings of a life they could call their own, tempered by hardship, strengthened by trust, and illuminated by the hard-won light of hope.